Hey fellow tankers, Mobius Y here with another video for World of Tanks console. So today's the day we're doing the next episode in my road to the T57 Heavy, looking at the Tier 8 T69 with a lengthy review video going on today. So, of course, by the time I release this, it will be after update 4.7, and the T69 got a minor buff to its reload times in update 4.7. So there are slight inaccuracies in the stats when we look at them a little bit later on, but I will reinstate that it's a little bit better now. So just remember that update update 4.7, there was a minor buff to the T69, just very, very minor. I'll explain what it is a bit later on when we start looking at the stats. So this first game here on Prokhorovka will show the T69's capabilities in a bit more of a long-range kind of supporting role, which isn't really the way that I recommend you always play the T69, but to be totally honest, I didn't really find a more workable position on a map like Prokhorovka. I tried different things, playing around in the middle. Eventually, I just decided, you know what, I should just go to the hill and shoot down on people, try to get side shots on people, as well as try and stop the enemy from just rushing over top of the hill and trying to overwhelm friendlies. So a couple good and bad things about the T69 as this game carries on. Good things as well as things that I liked. Now, one thing that a lot of people will kind of forget about the T69 is that it actually has a pretty dang good base view range. It has 400 meters view range for a Tier 8, which is pretty solid. So with the right equipment, in this case I put on optics and vents, you get a pretty hefty view range bonus, easily pushing up past 440, close to 450 meters. And various crew skills can also improve that. Things like Brothers in Arms, and if you have like situational awareness and recon, it'll just push it up even further. So good view range means this tank could spot for itself at longer ranges and also just play a kind of additional support role, which is the entire purpose behind this tank. It's not just a support role in terms of the damage that it can do, supporting teammates by shooting its whole clip and doing lots of damage to enemies in a fairly short time span, but it can also support by spotting. The other good thing about the T69 is it's fairly mobile. It has some good traverse rates on both the turret and the tracks. Its top speed is a little over 50 kilometers an hour. It won't often reach that. You'll often have it booting around 30 or 40 kilometers per hour on favorable terrain. But it's still fairly mobile. It's not the fastest medium tank around. It definitely won't win any speed races, especially against light tanks, for example. But it's no joke either. It's not exactly slow like some heavies and TDs you'll see at its battle tiers. What else about it? It's got some pretty good clip damage and decent, not really decent DPM, but it's just kind of that damage factor that it can put out there, and the fact that it can reload fairly quickly compared to some other Tier 8 autoloaders. It puts some kind of a bit of a psychological factor against players who are facing off against you. They don't like coming across a fully loaded T69 unless they're grossly top tier and they have a lot of hit points. Considering that the T69 has 4 shells with the top gun and each does 240 damage, you're looking at 960 average potential clip damage. That is a lot of damage. You'll take off 2/3 of the HP of pretty much any Tier 8 tank. There's some Tier 7s that you will straight up cripple, either drop them down to a one-shot, and a lot of Tier 6s will straight up die to that much fire. Some Tier 6 heavy tanks do have more HP. They will be able to withstand all 4 shells and still kick it around, but it's a very small number, and even a lot of Tier 7 heavy tanks, they'll be on life support if you are able to penetrate your entire clip and deal damage to them, because there's very few Tier 7 heavy tanks that have more than, I want to say about 1,200, 1,300 HP, so they'll be very, very low on HP. The difference, of course, is the Tiger 1 variants. The base Tiger 1 from the tech tree has 1,500 hit points, the same as many Tier 8 heavy tanks like the IS-3, as well as things like the Tiger 1 through 1. The Hammer has 1,550, as a matter of fact. So you just got to be cautious that you don't necessarily want to poke out and blow your whole load on those guys and then be able to have them just take you out while you're reloading the whole time. And because of that, this tank actually has pretty decent trade potential. It has 1,350 hit points which is quite a bit for a medium tank. It's not a huge amount, but you don't have much less than some heavy tanks. In fact, certain stock heavy tanks at tier 8 will have about the same, if barely just a little bit more HP than you do. So when you have that much HP, your trade potential is actually really high, especially against even tiered, some higher tiered enemies as well. Not very many, but some, you could easily trade 400 HP shot that they put into you for dealing 960 points of damage right back to them. So there's that. Bad things about the T69. The armor's pretty unreliable. It's a medium tank, so don't expect it to have armor that will hold up to things. Low pen guns, you can get some troll bounces from them. For example, T44s or Motherlands, which are also tier 8 medium tanks. Those can sometimes struggle depending on your angles, and if you cause them to ricochet with turning the tank at just the right moment before they fire, for example, they can get some troll bounces off it. But it is not anywhere near reliable. It's more just kind of troll armor rather than anything else. It's not particularly thick or effective anywhere, to be totally honest. But lower tier tanks, definitely if you find yourself top tier a lot and you're bullying some tier 6s, some of them might struggle, especially if you keep moving your tank and just throwing in those erratic angles so that they can't get an easy bead on your usual weak spots. So it's unreliable at best. Other bad things about the T69, the gun handling. I know it got buffed. It got buffed quite significantly with update 4.6, but it is still bad. It's not so much the aim time anymore. The aim time was buffed to a decent level, just a little bit, slightly below average kind of level of aim time with the 4.6 buffs, but the overall accuracy is not very good. The dispersion values are bad. As you can see, me aiming in on the 5100 there, it took a while because the reticule was just so huge from all the moving around that I did. And lastly, the Top Gun's penetration, even though it did get buffed as well, it only got buffed a little bit. It's honestly kind of poor. So you have to be very knowledgeable of weak spots, and sometimes you have to make the sacrifice of some HP or maybe even your tank if it means clutching out the win. Maybe just push forward enough, sacrifice a bunch of HP off your tank or the entire tank in general if it means that the 4 shots you'll put in will have a huge positive impact in the game. If it means pulling out a win, or if it just means getting out some damage because you want to try and get as much XP as possible out of an upcoming loss. There's that too. The overall accuracy is quite poor. It was also buffed a little bit, so it did used to be worse. The gun handling, as I said, it used to be overall worse. The aim time was quite a bit worse, and the overall accuracy was just a tad worse. So those were improved, but they're still not very good. This is a support tank. It is a close-in support tank. It might not have the maneuverability, penetration, or clip potential of a 5100, but its quick reload and its maneuverability does make it an asset on the field. So finishing that game with a total of 12 penetrations, 2255 damage. Honestly, this game was very lucky for me, I felt, because I relied on RNG quite a bit on many of my shots, especially on the T29 in the middle of the map there, who I managed to penetrate a good 3 or 4 shots on for around a good 700 or 800 damage or so. Also racked up 1874 assisted damage, all with spotting, and that's kind of why I like the view range on this tank, so I made use of it with my equipment picks when putting it on this tank. So, as I said, this tank is a close-in supporter. The 5100 has much higher clip potential, almost exactly double the clip potential, as a matter of fact, because it gets 6 shots with its 100mm gun that do 300 damage each. So it's got 1800 average clip damage potential. It is definitely more maneuverable, but it's also a bigger target, is the downside of it. It takes longer for the 5100 to dump out all that damage because the time between shots in the entire clip is about the same, if not a bit longer than the T69. And because it has more shots, it just means it will take longer to dish out all that damage. The T69 can poke out, it can blow its whole load in less than 10 seconds. giving it enough time to aim in so that you make each and every single one of those 4 shots count, and then it dips out of combat for about 25 seconds while you finish off the reload. So it's a much more kind of close-in support tank. It's still very good for maneuvering and repositioning and setting up ambushes and coming around on an enemy tank's flank and dishing out some damage to take off quite a bit of a chunk of their HP. It's also pretty good at that because it is a fairly maneuverable tank, but it also works really good if you are, for example, if you're working a corner with a teammate who you're actually communicating with, or better yet, a platoon mate that you're coordinating with. Your platoon mate can either eat a shot or bait a shot from an enemy tank for you, and then they can either put a shot back into them, possibly try and track them, and then you can poke out with your T69, put 4 more shots in them, and really punish them for poking out on your teammate. And it definitely works best if you are able to poke out and spend that entire time before you start dumping your clip unspotted. So let's go ahead and take a look at some stats on the T69. First, we'll go over the packages and things like the XP cost. So the starting package, you start off with the exact same gun that you get on the T71 DA. It's the top gun on the T71 DA. It works the same, 6-shot autoloader, shoots APCR standard, fairly low penetration, but pretty good overall gun handling. Now, this T69 A1 package, this first package here, it mostly just gives you a track and radio upgrade, but you do get a bit of an engine upgrade as well. Nothing significant. But the big thing here is that it's not a terribly expensive package, just under 25,000 XP for this first package here. Now, after that, you want to get this optional package first, and it actually costs around 33,000 XP, but for some strange reason, it was completely free for me, and I was not able to figure out why. It obviously meant that I had previously researched this engine, the Continental AOSI 895-5, but I have no idea where I researched it from. If somebody can answer where this engine is elsewhere in the US tech tree, please let me know in the comments below, because I don't know where I previously researched it from. It cost me 0 XP, and as you can see here, it also cost me 0 silver to equip it. But make sure you research this optional package first, because it gives you the final engine, which will maximize the maneuverability of the T69. Now, the last package you want to get is this T69 A2. This gives you the 90mm gun, the T178, excuse me. This package here is actually a little over 50,000 XP. So I've been saying in the previous episodes on the T21 and the T71 DA, save your free XP because those grinds are pretty easy. Definitely use it on this tank if you have any saved up, because it's a good 100,000 XP to fully upgrade the T69. So you want to try and get off of the stock package as quickly as possible. I would say if you don't have enough to fully upgrade the T69 right away, at the very least, try and get up to the optional package with the top engine to maximize this thing's maneuverability. And lastly, you need 170,000 XP to get the T54 E1. So you're looking at about 270,000 total XP to earn on the T69. So that can be a lot of games for those of you who don't have any free XP and don't use a premium account, for example. So let's take a look at the stats of the top package with the top 90mm T178 gun. As I said, this thing did get buffed in update 4.7, but very, very slightly. I'll tell you what in just a second. The engine power is 550. This thing doesn't really have a great power to weight ratio. So when you're going up even slight inclines, you can see the speed drop off quite a bit. It can drop as low as 20 or less kilometers, especially when you're trying to climb the hill on, say, Malinovka, for example. Take it up to the windmill where a lot of the major fighting happens. Now, as you can see in this snippet in this video, since I recorded it just literally days before update 4.7 dropped, the rate of fire is actually inaccurate. It says 6.86 in this snapshot here, but it is now, I had it written down, 7.27. The reload time on this top gun was reduced by approximately 2 seconds, from a 27-second base reload time to 25 seconds. So you should get a couple seconds faster reload time than what you saw in the gameplay video previously. I think my reload was about 24.75 or 23.75, one of the two. So you should be able to get the reload down to about 22 or even 21 seconds with similar equipment and cruise skills. Now, as I said, one of the major poor points of this tank is the gun itself. Its average penetration with standard AP is only 181 millimeters. The premium APCR is pretty decent. It's 250 millimeters of not APCR, of heat penetration, excuse me. This is really good for using against super heavy tanks, particularly the Japanese and German super heavy tanks, and definitely against higher tier tanks. You will find yourself shooting this quite a bit, so you may want to carry quite a bit of heat ammunition. Me, I didn't carry very much. I tried to utilize the mobility of this tank more so than I tried to use the raw penetration of the heat rounds to make my shots count. Lastly, the HE rounds, 320 average damage, which is a significant increase over the 240 average of the AP and heat rounds, and 45 millimeters of penetration. So if you know you're going to round a corner and you have plenty of time to reload a full clip of HE rounds, you can very easily take out, for example, a Borsig in a single clip. It will do a lot of extra damage if you get full penetrations with each shot. Now, as I said, the aim time and the accuracy were buffed in update 4.6. It used to be a 2.9 aim time with 0.40 accuracy, but those were buffed. Aim time is 2.3. It is a significant improvement. I noticed it right away, and I found this tank much more enjoyable after that buff. And the accuracy is 0.38. So again, not great. That's why I say you want to be close in support. It's while the aim time was improved to where it's definitely tolerable for a lot more people, the accuracy is still pretty poor and the dispersion values are just terrible. So you want to try and be close in support. Don't go anywhere alone. You want to make sure you have backup and you want to stay close to them. For a large part of it, you want them to be baiting shots for you or even taking shots for you until they get low HP. Then you want to try and keep them alive and use your own HP, or possibly even get some troll ricochets off this tank or eat shots with your tracks yourself. Speaking of the tracks, they have 42 degrees per second traverse rate, which is pretty decent for a medium tank. Nothing spectacular. It's pretty average there. And the turret itself, the frontal armor is rated at 152 millimeters. That's the thickest point on the front of the turret, and it's very, very specific points, so don't expect anything magical out of that value there. We'll go into more detail of that a little bit later on. The side is rated at 114, so very easy penetrations in the side, and the rear, 64. You're not really going to protect yourself in the back of the turret, obviously. The turret traverse is 38 degrees per second, so all combined, you're looking at 80 degrees per second of total gun traverse if you are rotating the chassis and the turret in the same direction. You can easily whip that gun around 80 degrees per second. That means you're essentially pulling a 180 in just over 2 seconds. So you can easily reacquire new targets with this medium tank, which is super handy. As I said, the view range is a very respectable 400 meters, and the signal range, less important, but it's 750 meters. Not as important, but still worth noting, especially on the bigger maps if you're trying to scout for your team. Let's take a look at things like the equipment and supplies that I use, starting with Consumables. In the Supplies tab here, I brought 28 armor-piercing standard AP rounds. These are not only... I not only brought a lot of these in to kind of get used to it, but they're also extremely cheap. As you can see, they're the same price as the high explosive rounds, only 255 silver per shot. So there's nothing wrong with bringing a lot of this ammo type in there. The heat rounds, while they do have quite a bit more penetration, you're essentially shooting 16,000 silver worth of heat rounds per clip, so it can get kind of pricey if you go in and bring a lot of heat as well as shoot a lot of heat all the time. Speaking of heat, I only brought 8. That's enough for 2 clips, and high explosive I only brought 4. That's enough for 1 clip. I didn't really find myself switching ammo to high explosive very much. I think I honestly did it maybe once or twice in the whole time that I played the T69. Heat rounds, however, I used quite a fair bit, mostly against really heavily armored tanks, especially Japanese and German super heavies. The VK100P was a glorious candidate for heat rounds, and even then I would still struggle to damage it sometimes. That's just one example. Japanese heavies, especially higher tier ones like the Type 4 at tier 9, definitely a good candidate for heat rounds. Consumables, pretty standard for when I get into the higher tiers. Large repair kit, large first aid kit, and an automatic fire extinguisher. You could definitely drop one of these for something like food to cut down on that reload time, as well as improve the gun performance even more. I would say the one to drop would be large first aid kit, because if you train things like pain tolerance and jack of all trades on your on your crew, it's much more tolerable. I don't really recommend going without a fire extinguisher. The chance for fire is pretty good, and it will take out a lot of HP as well as damage numerous other modules if you do get set on fire. Let's take a look at the equipment that I used. So trying to not just reduce the reload but also improve the view range of the tank. I went with improved ventilation. You can't mount a gun rammer on this because it's an autoloader, so the ventilation is the only piece of equipment that will reduce the reload time of your entire clip. Vertical stabilizer, that's a no-brainer because the gun handling is so bad on this tank. And lastly, this is entirely your pick, but I like coated optics. As I said, this thing has pretty good base view range, so by putting that view range up another 40 meters with just sticking coated optics on, you can turn this tank into a real support tank, not just in terms of the support it can offer by damaging enemy tanks through either flanking or through tag teaming around a corner or around a piece of cover, but also because you can spot for your team if you are in effective positions where you can do that. If you don't want to use that, if you don't want to use coated optics, I would definitely recommend an enhanced gun lane drive to help with that aim time. Apart from that, I don't really suggest anything else. You may consider wet ammo rack, but I really do not recommend it because you can just train safe stowage on the crew. Speaking of the crew skills that I had most of my essentials here to start things off, and just a couple other skills that I recommend you have by this point. But, you know, if you don't have a decent crew for the T69, which is, 8 skills plus or something like that, then don't fret. Just go with the basics. I have Mentor, Brothers in Arms, Sixth Sense, and Camouflage on this crew by the time I got to the T69. Clutch Braking was trained. I also trained Snapshot and Smooth Ride to help with that gun handling a bit, so it did improve it just a tad. Pain Tolerance, this is one that's kind of optional. I would say instead of Pain Tolerance, you definitely want safe stowage because the ammo rack is quite vulnerable on this tank. And of course, I had repairs. There was something else on this crew, but I swapped repairs out for it. So that's what I had on this tank. You don't necessarily have to get those crew skills on this tank in the same order, especially to make it work for you. That's just what I had on this crew by the time I was using the T69. So let's go ahead and take a look at some more detailed stats. Starting with the engine here, as I said in the overall page, in the general stats page, 550 horsepower, giving it a power to weight ratio of only 15.93 horsepower per ton. Not a great power to weight ratio, but it definitely could be quite a bit worse. That's fairly low for a medium tank in my opinion. The top forward speed, as I said, over 50 kilometers an hour, 51.5 kilometers per hour, and the reverse speed is actually a pretty respectable 20 kilometers per hour. I say respectable because there's a lot of higher tier American tanks that have a reverse speed of only 12 kilometers per hour, so it's very, very frustrating playing peekaboo around corners with them because they can't back behind cover very quickly. Some more stats on the gun. The reload time, as it says here, is 27 seconds, and I've said this about 4 times now. Update 4.7 buffed that to 25 seconds, so you'll get about a 2-second faster reload, roughly, than what you see in my gameplay here. Aiming time 2.3, I've already covered that. 0.38 accuracy, and as I've said previously, the accuracy on moving tank 0.58. Which isn't too bad, but the accuracy on the rotating turret, 1.04, not that great. Both of those combined when the tank moves at all really, really, really make that reticule bloom up and get huge very quickly. That's why the aim time buff that this tank got in 4.6 was so welcome. The max gun depression on this tank is actually a really nice 9 degrees, so it's very, very effective at supporting on ridgelines and hilltops even. Just be aware that it is quite easy for your turret to get shot out and for you to lose some crew member like your loader or your gunner, or possibly even have your ammo rack damaged, or possibly even the turret ring itself. So just be aware of that as you are working ridge lines. The max elevation is only 14 degrees, pretty poor to be totally honest, so it's really tough to hit targets that are above you on real high ground. And as it says here, shots per clip, 4 shots per clip, which is pretty nice. The turret previously 400 meters view range, 38 degrees per second, and then the tracks 42 degrees per second, traverse rates, and the terrain resistance is pretty average, 1.1, 1.2, and 2.1 on hard, medium, and soft terrain, respectively. So a brief look at the armor viewer. As you can see here, the really, really thick armor pieces where we mentioned that it was extremely, I said previously, it had a pretty decent looking turret armor value, but it's only in specific spots on the very front of the turret, just around the gun. So it's not reliable by any means. However, just because of the shaping of the front of the turret, you can get some troll bounces there, especially if people are simply trying to shoot just outside the gun. That's not where you want to shoot this thing. You want to shoot it around the turret ring, where the armor is much thinner and also much flatter. Also, shots into the hull shouldn't be too bad, as the armor in the hull, even on the upper front plate, is not very thick. It can get some troll bounces if even a high-pen gun shoots it at a bad angle, but those will be few and far between. So let's go ahead and take a look at where the crew and module is located using images off of WTInfo.net. Okay, first image here, starting with the left side of the T69. As you can see, in the very back of the turret on the left side, that's where the loader hangs out. Very easy for him to get injured, and right behind him is ammo rack. It's very tough to see in this image, I know, but right behind him is ammo rack, so it's very easy to cripple the reload potential of this tank, which is one of the strengths of the T69's autoloader over several others. It has a pretty low reload, especially when compared to other tier 8s. The turret ring is very easily damaged in the bottom half of the oscillating turret. So shoot there if you want it to have trouble acquiring new targets. Also, in the hull itself, the very back is all engine and fuel tank. Very easy to set on fire if you manage to get shots in those areas. And the very front of the hull, pretty much up to the nose of the hull itself, that is all ammo rack area. Very easy for this tank to get ammo racked when it is flanked. That's the place to shoot. Especially through the front drive wheel if you catch this thing coming around a corner, because there's a good chance that you'll not only track it, but you'll ammo rack it as well. Very back of the tank, it's very tough to see, but again, the ammo rack is easily damageable. On the left side of the turret in particular, by shooting into the back of it, and the very back of the hull itself, that is where the engine sits. So by shooting it there when it's, for example, trying to retreat, you could easily cripple its mobility and prevent it from escaping, or possibly even set it on fire. The right side of the tank, in the very back of the turret, that's where the commander sits, so you'll hurt the view range of this tank. They will lose the ability of their sixth sense skill, and everything else on the tank will just depreciate in terms of overall performance. The gunner sits in front of the commander. Frontally, the gunner will be a lot less likely to get injured, but if somebody gets a side shot into this part of the turret, it's much easier to actually hurt the gunner there. Again, the turret ring is easy to damage in the bottom half of the turret itself, and on the hull, again, very rare. That's all fuel tank, and in the pretty much the entire front half, that's all ammo rack. Try and get a shot through the front drive wheel. You'll track this tank, very likely get some damage, and if you pull off some damage, it's very easy to actually ammo rack it. And then for the very front of the tank itself, if you want to ammo rack this tank even further, just shoot it on the right side of its hull, which will be your left if you are facing this thing frontally. The gunner, as you can see there, he can be shot through that front plate on the front of the turret, but as I said, it's just really, really strangely sloped, so you can't really get it frontally. It's not a reliable way to injure the gunner by shooting that part of the turret directly from the front, just because of the sloping. Not necessarily the thickness of the turret itself, but just the sloping. So if you get it at a slight angle, you're much more likely to injure the gunner and just absolutely cripple the gun handling on this tank. And the driver sits on the opposite side of the ammo rack, on the lower parts of the hull, basically beneath the little driver viewports that you see there. So that'll basically sum it up for an in-depth look at the statistics of the T69. We're going to do a second game here. This one is a more close combat kind of map. It's Ruinberg, one of the oldest city maps in the game, and actually one of my favorite ones. This time, unlike in the previous game, we were pretty top tier. Aside from a single tier 9 on both teams, we were pretty top tier in that earlier game on Prokhorovka, but this game, we are definitely bottom tier. I wanted to make sure I got at least one bottom tier game to show that you can still get some damage even with such a low penetration gun on this tank, so long as you make use of the mobility of this tank. You're patient, you put that maneuverability to use, reposition where you need to, and get side and rear shots on people. That's the important thing. Now, as I'm driving into position, I did want to say it was actually extremely tough not to cherry pick just good games with this tank, because any good game that I had where I showed off the capabilities of this tank, and kind of give you an idea of what you can and what you do not want to do with this tank. They were pretty dang good games, and the games that were either just poor, where I would only get like 1,000 damage, they might be good to kind of show off how you can easily get wrecked, but not much else beyond that. And then the average games were just straight up kind of boring, so it was really tough to pick out two games for this tank. I feel like I was kind of cherry picking because these were two of my better games in this tank. At least I think they were. I definitely did have some 3,000 or 4,000 damage games with this tank. They were pretty few and far between, and the overall average for me, for my performance in this tank, pulling off, getting at least the HP worth of damage, 1,500 to 1,800 points of damage. That was largely average, and it wasn't uncommon that I would pull off, 1,000 damage or less. That's only like a single clip of damage or less. That was not uncommon. So my performance in this tank really, really fluctuated a lot. I'm just going to put it out there and say that. So I struggled just trying to come up with some good, or at least in my opinion, I struggled trying to decide what gameplay I wanted to use. So my first shot of the game, pulled it way too late on that enemy T69. Second shot, very lucky. RNG was definitely in my favor. As I said about the previous game, you don't want to be relying on RNG to pull off your shots. You want to be in a position where you can make use of your teammates and give yourself the time to actually aim in and pump out multiple shots on somebody in a situation where they basically can't retaliate. So poking up over the same piece of cover, that enemy T69 was retreating. So I got pretty lucky again, but I didn't really have the time to aim in, so I just RBRT as I poke over the piece of cover. Managed to get a shot into his backside for my second shot of damage in the whole game. So I decided to force a reload as we reposition, and we're kind of giving up that part of the town to the enemy team, as we only have 2 heavy tanks over there holding it. But they seem to be doing a good job. The enemy team isn't really pushing very hard into it, making use of the fact that there's only 2 enemy tanks over there. So we decided to reposition. Darkness wanted to pull back. He's in the Verzilla KV4, I believe it's called, and just playing heavy tank to kind of support me. So poking out, trying to cross this gap. I get spotted. I see that there's a Conqueror tracked and side on, so I put 2 shots into him, helping him finish him off. It looked like he was kind of stopping friendlies from continuing with the push on the east side of the map out there in the field section. Darkness tried to pull forward, got a shot in the side from the enemy IS-3 who is over there being really pesky, not even focusing on the people in front of him. He's just putting side shots down the entire street. So Darkness took a bad hit. However, he was able to retaliate by taking out the enemy T69. So seeing that the IS-3 is over there and kind of stalling the advance, I force a full reload, and I decide I'm going to flank all the way around and try to come up behind that IS-3, because we only have 1 TD over there on that side now. Any other tanks that may have been with him basically got taken out. Of course, in transit, the IS-3 gets taken out. This can be a common thing where you spend so much time repositioning and or just covering yourself while you're reloading that you lose the opportunity to get out some more damage and just help the team a little bit more. So you do kind of have to pick your battles. Try and reduce the time that you'll spend maneuvering and reloading and whatnot. Sometimes you just gotta go for it. If you see you can make a move, maybe you'll lose some HP, but if you have enough HP where you can suffer a hit or two in order to get into a position where you can not only get off a whole clip but complete a full reload and get off another clip or two, then by all means go for it. At this point, this IS-7 was just kind of free damage here. I just pulled up into his side, put 4 shots underneath the spaced armor behind his tracks. Much easier penetration for me to pull off there with only 181 millimeters of penetration. So 4 free full damage shots right there. I left him to the rest of the team. I knew there was no way that I'd get a reload off by the time he's dead. So as soon as I shot that clip off, I knew I had to be elsewhere. This E5 and the enemy Su-122 54, tier 9 Russian TD, have been causing problems for our entire team in this city area. They actually have quite a few kills between the two of them. I know that they've been alive there for quite a while, and they both have a decent amount of HP left over, particularly that E5. So at first I was thinking come around from this street here, just go to my left and come out in front of them, but eventually I decided, you know what, there's only two of them. They can't both cover their backside since most of our team is actually down by the flag in front of them. So I decided I'm going to come up behind him. This SU-122 54 has less than 500 hit points, so I can take him out in 3 shots, maybe 2 if I get a lucky high roll. So I put 2 shots into him. First one rolled really high at 270, so I take him out in 2 shots. This gives me all the time in the world to put 2 more shots into the E5. After putting the first shot into the backside, basically into his backside through his tracks, he just starts turning, but I'm still able to put 1 more shot into the rear area of his hull, where it's very thin, and that leaves him completely exposed with his armor turned away from the rest of my team, and my team is able to quickly finish him off. A total of 12 penetration ribbons that game, so essentially 3 full clips worth of damage. That is nothing to scoff at. I was always happy with even just getting 2 full clips of damage. So finishing that game with a sniper medal, landing a lot of my shots, 28-14 total damage dealt. The only shot that I missed was the very first one that I took at that T69. Kind of rushed that one and also mistimed it very poorly. So still able to rack up a decent amount of damage just by not only picking my shots, but picking my spots when I want to go in and where I want to shoot enemies, getting some damage against tier 10s to make a decent XP haul that game. So that'll pretty much sum it up for the review on the T69. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and this gave you a better idea of how this tank performs and what you can expect from it. As I said, the gun handling is this tank's biggest weakness, and it will be this tank's biggest gripe. Poor penetration is still workable if the tank is fairly maneuverable, allowing you to get in positions to expose people's side or rear armor if the flanking opportunity is there. But with this really bad gun handling, it also means you have to be extremely patient. Not many autoloaders have particularly good gun handling, outside of maybe the Waffenträger off E100. Even the AMX 5100 doesn't have fantastic gun handling, but you can definitely make use of this tank's much quicker reload over the 5100, or even one of the other autoloaders, like the AMX 1375, I believe, is the Tier 8 French light tank. You can still make use of this thing's pretty good clip potential and rapid reloads just by playing close and support. Back up your teams, and the big thing is don't go anywhere alone with this tank. Make sure you have some support with you as well. People who can eat shots or bait shots for you, essentially, meat shields, so that you yourself do not get rushed and overwhelmed and taken out long before you really do much of anything. Go for 8 penetrations with this tank, 2 full damage, 2 clips of full damage shots, and you will have more than done your part with this tank. This has been Mobius Y for World of Tanks console. Thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you at the next episode of the Road to the T57 Heavy, where we will go over the Tier 9 T54 E1. I also hope to see you on the battlefield or in my next video. As always, happy tanking.